Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions on all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures in order for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments both socially and politically that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces, and we just dropped a thought piece this past Sunday. So definitely be sure to check out the website and see some of the content that we've put together there. As an alternative, if you are running errands and you're out and about and on the go, well, we're available on 10 different podcast platforms. So definitely be sure to take us with you and listen at leisure. Now, as is the convention, definitely be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Allô tout le monde. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis, and this week our topic of discussion is education. Now, a few housekeeping items before getting started. I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that we also now are going live at minimum twice a month on our Facebook page, so definitely be sure to check out our Facebook page if you want to be part of our live events. Now, our live events are paid events, but these are events that allow us the opportunity to engage and have discussion around topics and concepts that will help us enrich our lives and live deeper, more meaningful, and more fulfilling lives. The next of which is coming up this Wednesday, so tomorrow by the time this video drops. So it might be a little bit too soon to get your ticket for this Wednesday, but definitely be on the lookout for our calendar for the rest of 2021, which is really just 2 months, which is mind-blowing. But we do have a bird's eye view of the topics that we'll be discussing for the remainder of the year, and we are excited at the prospect of engaging and really cultivating community in building each other up around learning these philosophies and these concepts and holding each other accountable to how they translate in our daily lives. Now, if this is something that interests you and this is something that you want to invest more of your time and energy into, and as you're, thinking about resolutions for next year, then you need to think about our package plan. So our package plans gives you not only access to our live events, but all of the engagements that we're building over and above the live events. So I mentioned the live events are currently at minimum 2, but we're hoping to build on that. And we're also going to be building webinars and workshops over and above just the live event, all around building the critical thinking lens, building up these life skills and soft skills that are required for us to live life more intentionally and to have the tools to really create the lives of our dreams. So something to reflect on, and again, you can attend the live event to get a sense of the ambience and get a sense of the energy and the experience that we're creating before deciding. But definitely, if you do see yourself engaging with our community on an ongoing basis, better to get the package plan and take advantage of those sweet deals. Now that that is taken care of and on your radar, let's jump into the topic of today. And I'm very excited about talking about this. I think this is a conversation that is long overdue. And I think we have this conversation maybe informally, or we might even have these conversations with ourselves, but it's never really translated in action. And I'm hoping that by having this conversation, it's going to create enough ripples, and I think it might create ripples, that it helps us rethink and think about the way that we navigate around this concept better known as respect. More specifically, the way we educate children and the way we educate ourselves and what it means to respect someone and how respect ought to translate in action. And I think that there is a lot that is misconstrued around this term respect. And I think because we don't have this shared definition, because we all have a fairly abstract working definition of what this word respect means, but most, if not all of us, are taught that it's really important to show up in spaces being respectful. It has translated in a lot of different ways for each of us. So all of us have our own sort of working definition of what it means to be respectful, and that's something that we pass on to our children, so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about this term respect. We're going to critique this term respect by way of how it's translated and the issues that are a byproduct of the way that it's translated up until this point, and why when we think about education and the way that we educate our children as we prepare them to enter public spaces and to interact with people who are family and strangers alike, how we can think about the way that we frame and position respect for their betterment and in a way that is self-preserving as opposed to potentially exposing them to harm. So I think that because everyone has their own working definition of respect, it is one of the most overextended and distorted interpretations of how it is meant to be defined. And a lot of that is based on our experience of what others expected of us when they expected to be respected. And I think that experience is a lot of what teaches us about what respect is. And the one issue with experience is that there's no control. We don't have a baseline, and sometimes what it is that we've experienced by way of how we ought to behave when it comes to being respectful is leaps and strides away from what respect actually ought to look like and how being respectful ought to feel like for us and for those around us. And this is largely due to a lack of governance and a lot of administration around the way that people hold others accountable by way of how they expect to be respected. And this is both in public or private spaces. So this is how respect sort of translates with your family, with your peers, with your colleagues, and with formal authority figures, as well as the informal authority figures in your life, and even also strangers, and also people across different age bands. And I think that respect across different age brackets is very interesting, especially now because we have a multi-generational workforce. So this notion of respect gets altered when we think about respect when we're in professional spaces over and above public spaces. And there's all of these different nuances to how respect sort of works in the way that we interact and socialize with one another. So when we look at the dictionary definition of respect, and I think that that's the best way to get started on this conversation, the first definition for the word respect is about esteem. So it's really about a sense of someone's excellence, of what someone has achieved and accomplished within their life, and treating them in accordance with those accomplishments, with that excellence, and with those achievements. And that's whether that achievement translates as a personal quality or as an ability. We recognize those qualities and those abilities, and we adjust our behavior accordingly. And now the second definition for the word respect is really about privilege. Deference to a right, a privilege, whether it's a privileged position, so a formal authority figure, whether that's a teacher while we're younger, or someone who's a relative, or a parent, our uncles, our aunts, our grandparents. It's a role or something that is considered to be protected, so it has certain rights or privileges attributed to it. So we adjust our behavior again accordingly. Now, it's very important. We adjust our behavior accordingly in response or sort of in recognition to either these formal titles or either as our willingness or desire to be cognizant of someone's abilities and their qualities. But there is nowhere in any of these two definitions that speaks to respect being offered blindly, and also speaks to respect being offered at one's detriment. And this is what we're really going to talk about by way of education and respect, because I think that because we don't talk about the constraints or the limits of respect or when respect should be withdrawn, we never really talk about how it is that we ought to feel when we're respecting someone and how we expect to be treated when we offer respect. And I think that because these aspects of respect and how it translates are rarely discussed, because we just assume that those who are respected are respectable, there's a lot that gets lost in translation, and there's abuse and exploitation that takes place as a byproduct of that. And we know that this is the case because currently the statistics for abuse, and I'm not going to specify the kinds of abuse, but I will provide the resources down below. 1 in 4, or even sometimes in certain cases across North America, 1 in 3 children are going to be subject to some form of abuse before they're at the age of 18. And this is typically abuse by the hands of someone who is the age of maturity and who ought to be someone who behaves in a respectable manner, because they're someone who are typically people in positions that are respected, and they exploit that respect that is offered by younger individuals who haven't been given the guardrails around, when it is the time to withdraw respect, because we never really think, well, if this person's respectable, like, why would I need to teach my children how to withdraw respect? And I think that this is the part of our education, and whether this education happens at home or whether it's something that we incorporate in curricula, that really needs to be discussed more explicitly so that we can really address the rates of abuse that are taking place. Because the flip side of that rate of abuse is we don't really have a sense of the amount of adults or people in positions of authority or people who are, held in high esteem, like how many of those individuals are inclined to abuse the respect that they're provided. And because we don't have those figures, we really need to do more, and we need to be more intentional about the way that we think about and communicate how respect ought to translate, and how those dynamics between the person being respected and the person being respectful, how those dynamics should go. And to kind of further that argument, what someone needs in order to feel respected should never translate as mental, emotional, psychological abuse. It should never translate as physical, mental, emotional pain or discomfort. Respecting someone should never feel like I am diminishing my own sense of dignity and I'm exposing myself to feeling shame. So I should not subject myself to pain, to shame, loss of my own sense of dignity, and also loss of my sense of self-respect and my sense of self-worth. So in other words, any notion that respect should be or ought to be unilateral, so just one directional, is really very problematic. It's a toxic ideal, a working definition of respect, opposed to being reciprocal. So respect really ought to be reciprocal. And when we have respect translate in a unilateral way, as opposed to teaching that respect is a reciprocal exchange, then that notion of respect gets distorted, and that distortion is then leveraged in order to be exploitative and to be abusive. And that's what we're seeing in our communities and our societies today. We're seeing that because of this gap, because of this disparity in our understanding, and because we expect respect to be unilateral and as opposed to being reciprocal, we see a lot of abuse of power, and we see a lot of people overextending this term respect in order to gain unhealthy leverage over others. What I'm really saying at the root of it is that if ever it is the case, and this is what needs to be educated and communicated, that someone takes their title, they take their authority, they take their position or their age, fill in the blank as a token of why they ought to be respected and how it is that we should behave. If they feel as though they are entitled to that respect as a byproduct of those aspects, and it infringes on your own sense of personal safety, security, comfort, and wellness. In other words, they use what they think is, their entitlement to respect as an opportunity to mistreat or to abuse you. This someone has demonstrated by their actions that they are not worthy of that respect, and that respect in and of itself needs to be stripped. These people have demonstrated, despite those attributes and those qualities, are not in fact worthy of respect. Quite the opposite, actually. Any person who sees an opportunity to be respected as also a pedestal from which to punish those who are beneath them. So they see respect as being on this pedestal or a position above others. And from that position of power, they punish and abuse those who are beneath them, are people who aren't worthy or who do not deserve to be respected. So they're people who have demonstrated by their actions and by their attitudes and values that despite their accomplishments, their achievements, their qualities, despite their status, their titles, whatever the case might be, they lack the depth of character, they lack the substance, they lack the moral substance to carry the weight that comes with being respected. So how they got in those positions, I will never know. And sometimes respect is attributed for very arbitrary reasons, or because they're my relative, I ought to respect them, or because they're a part of my community, they ought to be respected, despite the fact that they have not demonstrated in their behavior that they can carry the weight of being respected. If they see respect as sort of this opportunity to abuse, then that is not someone who understands like that respect is a reciprocal exchange. And if they can't understand the reciprocity required with respect, then that respect in and of itself needs to be withdrawn from them. So I think it's very important that we communicate when we educate around respect. The respect in and of itself is relative. We show it to the extent that we recognize that the person that we're offering respect to demonstrates humility, demonstrates regard, and also reciprocity. They see that we still, ourselves as humans, are deserving of respect. Respect is something that is earned daily. It's never something that we should allow anyone to think that they're entitled to. No one is entitled to respect. And I think this is also one of the things that we need to really rethink and we need to recalibrate our definition on, because a lot of the times we feel that respect is owed because of certain qualities and certain traits. And I think that it's important that with those qualities and with those traits, like we can be more mindful, but I think respect is still something that we ought to demonstrate when someone is behaving in a way that shows that they can carry the weight of being respected and they don't feel entitled to that respect. And because of that sense of entitlement, they feel inclined to be abusive and to extort and to be exploitative. So we're really in this video addressing the fact that there are many people who ought to be respectable, who have demonstrated in their behavior, and all of us have personal anecdotes of this that demonstrate that they clearly and very evidently are not people who can carry the weight of that respect. And again, we all have access to these stories in our personal, our social, our professional networks. And it's interesting because most, if not all of us, were raised to be respectful. And I'm someone, even as a youth, I was fairly rambunctious as a youth. I always had a voice, and I always recognized that like my voice was for me to use, but I was always taught to, be respectful of my elders. And I think that it was interesting because I was always sort of immersed in different communities where people were of varying ages, and I always recognized that there was an invisible line in the sand if it was the case that I was speaking to someone who was elderly. So I had some wiggle room, so I had a lot more room, I guess, for rebuttal. I had room for healthy rebuttal with different adults of various ages in the way that I recognized that the consequences would be doled out. But there was this invisible line with people who were elderly, and I was not to talk back or be disrespectful to someone who was elderly. And this was something that, I would always think twice or three times. And if it was the case that I didn't want to listen or I didn't really care to engage with someone who was very elderly, I always thought twice and three times about how I was going to respond, because of this unspoken rule that if someone had white hair, if they were elderly, like that was someone that ought to be respected, and I would be held accountable like to a higher power if I disrespected someone who was on the earth long enough to have white hair. And I remember I used to have a lot of internal struggles because again, I was very vocal, I was very rambunctious as a child. I definitely knew my mind at a very young age. And I realized when I was young that while it was appropriate for me to be cognizant of people who were very elderly, and I made every effort to be, there were some people who were very elderly that really didn't carry the qualities that I felt, comfortable like demonstrating respectfulness based on the things that they requested. And I think many people have experienced this, and I realized, well, you know what, there's a spectrum by way of respect. And when I decided, well, this person isn't worthy of respect, it didn't translate as me being disrespectful. And I think that we need to realize that there is a difference in the way that we treat those who ought to be respected, and recognizing that this person is not behaving in a way that aligns with, how a respectable person would behave. So I'm going to withdraw my respect, but then also withdraw myself. I'm not going to act out or behave disrespectfully by any means. I'm not going to kind of put myself in a position where I'm being exposed to being held to like a higher power, but I'm also not going to subject myself to discomfort and to feeling like I don't think that this person is going to take my trying and desiring to be respectful and treat that desire with care. I don't think they're going to treat that desire with reverence. I don't feel that they have the integrity to really carry the weight of my respect. So I'm going to withdraw it and also withdraw myself. I think this is part of the lesson that we really ought to teach to our children. It's like, if you recognize that someone is trying to capitalize on your sense or your desire to behave in a way that you've been taught in terms of how you respect those around you. And it doesn't mean you automatically revert to being disrespectful. It does mean, though, that you withdraw the respect. You recognize that they're not behaving in ways that align to how a respectable person would behave. And you withdraw yourself from that situation, because respect never should translate as you feeling uncomfortable or you exposing yourself to psychological, emotional, physical harm. And I think that this is what I wanted this talk on education to be about. And it's about the education or the miseducation around respect and how we address this miseducation and also how we correct it. So I would love to hear your thoughts and your points of view on this. I'm sure all of us do. Respect is something that is very prevalent in every culture and every society, and it translates in fairly similar ways across societies across the world. And I think a lot of us are dealing with this misalignment between how respect should translate and why the people who ought to be respected maybe don't have the backbone, have the moral backbone, or have the depth of character to carry the weight of that respect, and how we can protect ourselves from those who are in positions that typically would involve being a respectable person, and how we deal with the people who exploit those positions and exploit the people who are trying to behave in desirable ways with people who are, fairly questionable in their sense of entitlement and their behaviors. And I think that it's important that we give our children the appropriate tools to safeguard themselves, to preserve themselves, and to think critically about when they offer respect and also when they withdraw it. So this is really a topic that is going to garnish engagement, and not just with me. I would love for you to engage with one another as well. I'd love to hear your point of view on respect and how you were expected to be respectful to those around you, and how, because you weren't given guardrails around, when to withdraw respect or withdraw yourselves, how that might have translated in a really terrible situation, or how that potentially did translate in a terrible situation because that person who ought to be respectable really just wasn't. And I think we need to start seeing the reality for what it is and manage our behaviors accordingly and adjust our behaviors accordingly, so that we're not dealing with more tragic stories and we're addressing these rates of abuse that are taking place, because there are too many people who are in esteemed positions and who should be respectable who just simply aren't. So thank you so much for tuning in. That was the topic for this week. I would love to hear from you. I would love for you to engage with this video. Share this video with someone who also would have opinions on the topic of our miseducation around respect. And I look forward to seeing you in our next video. We'll talk to you soon.
Just feel like no one's listening.